All right, guys, welcome back to the Q Method podcast. I have a good one lined up today. It is a solo podcast, and I want to talk about today the crossover between fitness and sales. I've got a lot to talk about, and one of the biggest things is going to be negotiation. The moment that you negotiate in your fitness is the moment you'll start negotiating in your sales, and both will crumble. Both will not end up being what you want them to be. So to get started on this podcast and to kind of keep things in line here, I really want you guys to think about this idea that the amount of reps that you put in the gym, right, will kind of translate to how strong you get, essentially what will be the outcome, right? And a lot of times at the beginning, I believe that there's a certain amount of reps you got to get good at sales. There's a certain amount of reps you got to get through to get even just halfway decent in the gym or somewhat stronger in the gym. And a lot of people will stay on the fence because they don't want to go through the volume, right? The volume of reps that it takes, right? For me, it was knocking doors for I don't know how long, how many doors, but years and years of knocking doors, right? That was I think the framework that got me into sales and got me through the reps very quickly, right? Getting told no, 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 over and over again, right? And I think that's the same thing with sales and fitness. Is at the beginning you go through a certain amount of reps where you don't see your body change. You're just setting the framework and just getting in the game by getting some volume in. So if you're at that point, I would recommend just getting some volume in, right? And then when you get to the point where you've done the reps, you got to have a plan and you've got to be able to stick to the plan long term. So after you've gone through some reps, then you got to start thinking, okay, how can I get to 10K a month, 20K a month? How can I get to squatting 200 pounds, 300 pounds, 400 pounds, right? And I think a lot of times for me, the lesson that I've learned is the mastery comes through people that stick through that boredom and that repetition, and finally they get enough reps to where it starts to click and they start to just make sense, right? And then I think at that point you become very effective with your time, right? It's not just about throwing random volume and calling random leads or knocking on random doors. You start to be calculated. You want to talk to people that are qualified. You want appointments on your calendar. You're not here to just waste time calling aimless leads. You're very, very much more calculated with the time you spend. But I do feel like that first growth does come from the repetition, right? And a lot of times through that repetition, you'll have days where with fitness, you want to hit snooze, right? Or you want to skip the workout. And once you do that, I feel like it translates to fitness, right? You skip the gym, you skip the workout, then it translates to sales. You skip the sales calls, you skip knocking doors, you skip prospecting, and they go so hand in hand. That's why I talk so much about fitness and sales, because I've seen the parallel in my life. I've been in both for so long that I'm really starting to notice that these two things, if you can dial one in, you should be able to apply those principles and dial the other one in. Point number 2, I guess, would be how can you handle the no's without burning out? How can you handle the rejection? How can you handle the fact that you don't have a six-pack after 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 2 years, right? Now that is where I think when you can handle the no's, but you're also not satisfied with the no's, meaning you want growth, you want to get better. You're not like just, oh, it's okay, I got a no. I think there's a big balance there between you're okay with a no, but you're also like, how could I get better so I don't get so many no's? It's just resistance and it's just a learning. And that's the lesson that I would share is like, a no is a lesson to get to the yes. A no is a learning along the way, but you do have to learn or you'll just keep getting the no's. You got to adapt, you got to change. And I'm not saying change your whole pitch or change your whole sales philosophy, but you have to take something from that call where you're like, oh, I could have done that better. I'm going to focus on that next call. So then it won't repeat itself. And then my last point here with how sales and fitness are very much the same. They're in parallel. Data, data, data. Fitness, you're tracking your macros. You're tracking your lifts. You're tracking how much you did last week, how much weight you did this week. In sales, you're tracking your conversion rates. You're tracking, where your leads came from. You're tracking how many sales you got. What's your call percentage, your closing percentages. When you step into the next level, you realize that tracking is the separator between average to elite and the guys that are operators that get it done, that make it happen, and guys that are amateurs, they don't track. Now, in fitness, I've said it for a long time, the best decision I ever made was buying a food scale. And it is so simple, but that literally changed my physique forever. And I think it's the same thing in sales. When you got the spreadsheet out and you're tracking every single day what's going on in your sales, you're not as emotional. You know that this is part of the process. You know that there's going to be ebbs and flows, but you're not completely flabbergasted when you get a few no's in a row. And I think growth happens when you start tracking, because you can't hide from numbers. People lie, emotions lie, numbers don't lie. There's a reason why you track. There's a reason why people that get results track the things they're doing. If you want to be an amateur the rest of your life, then don't track. Say it's too aggressive or it's too this. I used to say it's way too aggressive to track your food. Like, why would I ever do that? That's exactly what someone would say that's average. And that's the same thing someone would say that's an average closer. Why would I track my numbers? So if you don't know your numbers, figure them out. Start tracking them daily, weekly, monthly. And whatever you're not doing very good at, if that's fitness or if that's sales, start tracking. And it will improve. You can't improve what you don't track. And I think that's where I want to leave it. That's the third point, tracking. So if we go over this again, number one, you got to go through the law of volume. You got to be able to crush volume. You got to be able to crunch the numbers in sales and fitness to get to that starting line. Then point two, you got to be able to handle no. It's a growth opportunity. It's a learning. And then point three, the data doesn't lie. If you can do those three things, I believe that you'll be on the right track this year and you'll start crushing. I've seen it in myself. As soon as I started tracking my numbers in sales, things started to improve. Now, it does make you annoyed, when you have bad weeks. It does push you. And that's the thing that's not fun about it, is you get to see why you suck some weeks, why you're not doing what you should be doing. But you get to see it tangibly. And then you get to push yourself off of real results, not just guessing, not just guesswork. So I think I'm going to end with just a challenge here. Stop looking for hacks this year. Start tracking. Fitness and sales are so similar. If you figure out one, you can figure out the other. It's the same principles for each. I challenge you guys to pick one area that you're going to audit, where you're currently negotiating, where you are currently in this limbo, where you're like, oh, I need to just work harder. No, track the numbers. Maybe it's not even that you need to work harder. You just got to, be more valuable with your time, right? So figure that out. Figure out what you're negotiating. Attack it today, not tomorrow. As always, appreciate you guys for listening in. Until next time, let's get it.